Hey, everybody. It's glad to be with you tonight on this Tuesday evening. Give folks a chance to get into the room. I know it's pretty late. Some folks may be asleep. We don't normally do this at this time, but um, we're going to do it at this time, if that's okay with everybody. Once you jump in the room, let us know you're here, though. Please let us know you're here. Let me know you're here. Give a shout out if you're in the room today. Um, I thought about rescheduling it. I thought about us really talking about a couple other things. Obviously, I think our hearts and minds are with the folks that are in Buffalo, those who have passed, who were murdered, um, and just really, really considering violence and hatred and hearts that are hurting. And I appreciate those of you who are taking time. Um, Definitely to pause and to reflect. But I definitely wanted to talk about. I felt it was necessary to continue to have this conversation tonight because I think anything that can heal a heart, it's meaningful. So I'm glad you're here. If you're in the room, hey Shelby, hey my friend, good to see you. Glad you're here. I know it's late, but we won't be long tonight. We're going to do around 30 minutes. I wanted to really uh, have this conversation. So I won't hold the time up. I'll let folks just come in the room as they're here, and we we'll get to this conversation. So basically, I wanted to talk about shame tonight, and the reason primarily I wanted to talk about shame um, is because I think more of us struggle with shame, or have either struggle with it or struggle with it, and it's something we don't talk about. It's not a topic that's often spoken about. And I think primarily because, no pun, but I think many of us are ashamed to talk about shame. But I wanted to talk about it specifically because I just released um, my book, Trust Life. And the impetus behind penning Trust Life didn't have everything to do with shame, but it definitely was connected to shame and the roots behind shame, at least the roots as I've experienced it. And so I want this conversation really to be less about what I define as shame, what I think the roots of shame are, or, what I'm saying shame is. I want it to be less about that and more about the questions that we ask ourselves about shame and its role in our lives. For many of you, if you know me, definitely if you know me personally, I don't run away from the conversation around my faith. I speak often about it. I talk about God in my work. I talk about my faith and my relationship with the Lord. I've done so more in the past few years than I have before because I own my own business now, and I, you know, I feel called and led, like I can talk about my faith now, like openly, because that's how I want to live my life. But because of that, though, as I was really investigating in my life around shame, what shame represented for me, I had to begin to have some honest discussions with myself about what was shame, because I had never really used the word before. You know, I had never really, to my recollection, ever said, I'm ashamed of that, or I'm ashamed of this. Um, for me, it was more guilt, more than anything. I'll feel guilty about this or maybe so forth, what have you. And they're two different things. I think guilt is actually can be fairly healthy. I think as Dr. Brene Brown would share in her research around vulnerability and shame and the like, she would say that shame is really not healthy. Now, again, I don't want to debate in that realm, but I will say I think there is a difference. And I do believe that the difference, though, rests in the fact that guilty can actually be an acknowledgement of something that we are aware that we've done, and we basically want to make something right and what have you. I think shame is less about per se having done something wrong, but being embarrassed about something that we've experienced, done, seen, what have you. And so the differences are actually very stark. But to that effect, for me, that lived experience through asking those questions about, what is this I'm feeling, really led a large part of me to begin writing the book Trust Life in a framing of sorts around beginning with shame. Well, what does shame have to do with trusting life, right? Well, for me personally, what I began to see was that I was feeling this way. I hadn't named it yet. I was feeling this way of less than. I was feeling this way of embarrassment. I was feeling a way that I was not worthy. And all those feelings that were conjured up inside of me, I didn't have the name for it. But then I was reading something, and then I saw something on TV. I saw this interview. And the person in the interview used the word shame in the context that really brought me pause. And the pause was that the words that they were using were the words that I was feeling and experiencing. And then she said, shame. And I said, my God, I think the whole time I was ashamed of using the word shame because it meant that I had gotten to a place of not being able to control my circumstances. And that to me was revealing in a sense. It was revealing of a place that I had gotten to where I did not feel comfortable in my own skin. And I think for many of us, we may not use the word shame, but we have the feelings of what shame embodies. The embarrassment, how did I get here? How did this happen to me? What will people think? What are people thinking? And I do believe that shame, because of those stories that it creates in our minds and our hearts about ourselves, that shame is highly destructive. And I felt myself in that place, that shame. But what's more, though, deeper than that experience was the opposite of that shame. I began to ask myself, why is it that we feel these things, right? These worldly things. And I say worldly because remember, shame is this thing that happens because of the embarrassment of not only what we think about ourselves, but also what we think people are thinking, right? It's this, I'm not supposed to be this way. I'm not supposed to be here. And if we are making the assumptions and or the affirmations that I'm not supposed to be something, I'm not supposed to be in this position, I'm not supposed to have this happen, we are basically stating that there is a norm, right? There's a norm that we are supposed to be held to, that norm standard, and that we're not meeting that standard. That's what That's what we're saying in that statement, right? I'm not supposed to, right? It's not supposed to happen to me. I'm not supposed to be in this position. When we find ourselves in that space of trying to meet the standard, the norm, and we're failing, we're embarrassed, we feel less than. The question I began to ask myself, the question, this right, the question, okay, I'm gonna stop there. Say, were you, the bigger question is, were you ashamed or were you shamed? So, right, two different, right, ones can be, say, um, a thing, an action, right? Being shamed can be like you can be shaming yourself. You can shame yourself, giving yourself negative talk, right? Or somebody else could be giving you negative talk, right? Or being ashamed, right? The action, the active feeling of being less than, right? Ashamed, embarrassed, giving, so those two words both are depending on the context, right? For me personally, I was ashamed. And because I was ashamed, I began shaming myself. So I think that's a great question, right? I think there's levels to it, right? I think some people can feel guilty and move on and be, I feel guilty about that. I'm just gonna move on. But if you talk about being ashamed of something, it's a deeper embarrassment of feeling and emotion that then will begin to be perpetuated in a space of we begin to shame ourselves almost, right? How could you do that, Glenn? How could you be so stupid? How could you be so reckless, so thoughtless to get yourself in this position? So one can lead to another. I believe shame can be deadly. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation tonight, because I think I like to think clearly before we have these talks, right? But I think we need to be very clear about shame and the destruction that shame can bring into our lives, to the lives of our loved ones. I think shame is can be rooted in a few things. And that's why I don't want to necessarily go into the debate of whether it's created through ourself or through other biological types of experiences or through that evidence, because I think it's a little bit of both, a little bit of all. Depression, certain types of depression, certain types of social anxiety, all these things can contribute to shame. And we should be mindful of that. And because we need to be mindful of that, I want us to be more mindful of the question to ask ourselves: are we ashamed? Are we living in shame? And ultimately, is that activating us to then shame ourselves, to get us to a place to where we forget that shame actually is not about what God has for us. So here we go into this conversation. And if this is not your conversation, I understand. But I have to talk about it in the context of how I've experienced it. For me personally, what I realized is that the disconnection from God for me was feeding my shame. I'm going to say it again. When I was not, and when I do not go into communication through prayer, through meditation, through whatever the vehicle that I use at that moment to really speak to and listen to God, I get disconnected from God. And when that happens, where I can see the correlation that shame is able to creep into my existence. Those voices that are saying that, again, you shouldn't have done that, man, or you sure you should be doing this, or is this the right thing? I see the correlation. And I want to share this because to me, it's not about my correlation being your correlation, but it is about, again, asking the question, what is it for you that allows shame to creep into your heart, into your mind, into your spirit? What is it for you? Have you ever asked yourself the question? When I start feeling that way, when that self-talk starts reflecting being ashamed of something, because I'm ashamed of something, I begin to shame myself. Where is that coming from? That's the first thing. I want us to be mindful enough and aware enough to ask that question. Because I believe if we're able to be strong enough, courageous enough to ask that question, then we can begin to unravel and pull back the layers and get to the root of what we're missing in our lives that actually fills us in a way that connects us to something that's real. Because shame is created. Shame is created. I'm not saying that we don't do crazy things and we don't make bad decisions. I'm not saying that. But shame, though, is created. Again, remember, if you think about what shame is, embarrassment, feeling not worthy, the bad self-talk, that's created to meet a standard or a norm. Right? So this is created. So if it's created, then we have to ask ourselves, where is that coming from? The question is, it feels like the power we allow the external, the environment around us to have on our internal, the essence of who we are, can be too great at times. That's powerfully and eloquently stated. that power that we give the outside world, right? Eloquently stated. The power that we give the outside world, that can be so powerful that it overcomes our spirit, who we are. Now, I don't try and get folks to be like, wait, if you believe in God, you don't believe in God. But I have to associate it from my lens to just, to bring it to life. For me, to that point that was just mentioned, for me, when I'm connected to God, the outside world doesn't have a chance. Right? Like when I'm in a consistent relationship, communication, prayer with God, and the outside world, though I struggle still, at the end of the day, that relationship is much stronger with God. What I share with folks is, and I talk about this in one of the previous books, Plan B Sucks, I talk about faith. I talk about the power of faith, and that I don't, care, whoever you believe in, whoever God, whatever it may be. But if you don't have faith, if we don't have faith, something that's bigger than us, that's not of this world, if we don't have that, then it's going to be a difficult life. Because to your point, the world, the essence of the world, is powerful within itself, of itself at least. And if we have no faith that there's something greater, right, then the essence of whom we are then can come into question. So how do we battle that? So for me, it is a very intimate conversation about what is it that you have, that you believe in, that's greater than you, that you have faith that there's creator, whether you call him God or what have you, that that is bigger than you, that loves you, that cares about you, that at the end of the day, that has your best interest at heart. Because if that is present for you and you're able to be consistently in relationship with that spirit and faith, then shame is going to have a hard road to get into the essence of who you are. I hope that made sense. For me, it was very, very revealing again to be able to make that correlation. That for me, there is a clear point of reference when I am feeling ashamed and my disconnection from God. It's a clear point and clear correlation. There's evidence for me. And so I would ask that we ask those questions for ourselves. When I'm in that space, what am I feeling? What's missing? What's missing? Dale, that's Dale. What's going on, brother? My man, mentor, friend, brother. What's missing in that space of my life? It rocked my world, honestly. I recall having a conversation with my wife, and it was very emotional for me because I was feeling a certain way, and I had to openly admit to her. I was like, I said it incorrectly actually initially, and I had to reset and correct myself. I was like, you make me feel ashamed. And as I was processing the words they were coming out of my mouth, I was like, it's actually not her that made me feel ashamed. She didn't make me feel ashamed. I created a norm and a standard. I created it in my head that I did not hit. I did not land on that norm and standard. And because of that, I began to feel ashamed. And then I went a step further and I basically then projected it on her and said that she made me feel ashamed. She hadn't created the norm and standard. I did. I wonder how many of us are out here in our lives with our loved ones, with our friends, with our jobs. How many of us are creating norms and standards that were not even given to us, not even asked of us, yet we create them. And then when we don't meet them, we project onto others that they then make us feel shame. I want you to sit with that. What's up, bro? What's up, bro? What's up, Chief King? Every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. That's 100% on the money. On the money. Every sinner has a future. I want us to sit with how much and how many times have we been in that position where we were pointing the finger at someone, saying that you make me feel this way, when in reality, it's the norm and the standard that we created in our minds that we missed or we didn't hit, or it's the story that we're telling ourselves in our heads, and we don't quite get there. And then we project how someone or what we say someone is doing to us, when in all reality, what's happening is we're feeling in a place of shame. Shame is destructive. Shame can be deadly. And I don't want anybody else to mix up shame with a disconnection from the spirit within you, whether that be God, your faith, whatever it may be. I don't want us to mix it up. I don't want anybody else to feel as though the norms and standards that we're creating in our heads are actually real. I want us to really focus on what are we disconnected from? What are we disconnected? Is it gratitude that we're disconnected from? Is it purpose in our lives? Is it love that we're disconnected from? Is it our spirit, our faith walk? Whatever it may be, I want us to ask that question first. When I'm not feeling my best, when I feel as though I'm embarrassed, I've let folks down, I've let myself down, I haven't met the standard, the norm, I'm not up to stuff. I'm a grown man and I don't have my stuff together. I'm all over the place. So I'm a woman and I'm trying to figure it out with my family, or I'm a married couple, or things are going crazy. Whatever it may be, whatever your situation may be, and you're telling yourself a story that basically ends with you're not enough. When you get to that point, I want you to stop and I want you to pause and ask yourself, no. I want you to start with no. And then I want you to follow that up with the question I need to ask myself is, what is missing? What am I disconnected from? For me, it was God. I don't know what it'll be for you, but I put my money on most folks. It'll probably be God too. I'm gonna put my money on it. The little I do have. I want us to talk more openly about shame. If you're work at a job and you have an opportunity to have open conversations with teammates or teams you lead, or even in your church home or your community, your neighborhood, your friend circle, I want us to talk about shame, or I want us to just broach the topic, just open it up. What do you guys think about shame? What are folks thinking about shame? And I promise you it'll be one of the most powerful and enlightening, inspirational, moving, reflective conversations you will ever have. Because shame runs deep. It runs so deep that we mostly don't speak the word, and we definitely don't have the conversation. That's my prayer. That we need to uncover, unravel, and peel back the layers of shame. Shame is real, but it's real because we create it. It's real because we create it. And because we're human, we're going to create things that actually, again, are created from us, but it doesn't mean we can't uncover where it's coming from, what it means to us, what it's triggering for us. Because much of the loss that I see in my life, where people are struggling with living life, with being here, figuring out, am I worthy? Has nothing to do with what is really happening. It has everything to do with what we are creating. And is embedded and embodies shame. So, question here, last question I put this one out here, says, how often do we hold ourselves back because of the fear of what others may think? Yeah, I mean, often we hear people say, what you think about me is none of my business. And, we give that roar kind of speech, and I can appreciate it. And I believe it as well, actually. But I think it's more difficult for people to live into that statement. What people think about me is none of my business. Depends on how you grew up in this world, depends on your lived experience. That might just not be real to you. For me, it is. It's how I grew up, but I'm mindful enough and conscious and aware enough to understand that many of us did not grow up in that type of environment where what people thought about me, you know, wasn't my business. Everything, sometimes people grew up, everything what people thought about you is your business. And we tried to appease them, right? We tried to meet that standard and that norm. And it's difficult if you lived a life of decades leading a life this way, feeling a certain way. You begin to believe that way of life. And sometimes it's very difficult for us to then switch gears and to fully embrace the idea, even if you are a faith believer in God, it's still difficult for many people to believe that it doesn't really matter what people think. That if I'm in communication and connection to God, that God guides my path. It's a tough road, even for faith believers, to literally live that life. Because even you, whoever is out here who's a faith believer, we have those moments. We've had those moments where we were in a place of shame and we had to battle out of it. But what I would submit to you is that if you are in a relationship with God, that you have a faith that's bigger than this world, that is the one way that we can battle what is worldly. Because shame is worldly. God has never and will never be ashamed of us. And I think it's important for us to speak openly about the stories we tell ourselves, the lies that we tell ourselves, that God has no connection to. It's important that we have this communication with one another, that we open it up in our friend circles, even in our places of employment. Wherever we can, it's important. Because I believe today more than any day, when we look around at suicides, at depression, at hurting hearts, at violence, I believe more today than ever before, it is important for us to begin to openly speak about what we are creating in our minds and hearts and living with silently is shame for a number of things and reasons. We are living with it silently, but it's killing us openly. It's killing us openly. So my prayer is that you begin to have those conversations tonight, tomorrow, and the next day, so that we can begin to heal ourselves. Because that's what it will take. To speak to one another, honestly, openly, safely. Hey, Nicole. So I pray that this message is something that you will share with others. I pray that you will begin to have those conversations as well in your home, in your community, in your church, in your friend circle, at your work. Yes, healing has to take place, and we have to begin to have the conversations to do so. There are people that are hurting, that are in a place of shame, that are in a place of pain, and until we openly make it safe for all of us to share what that shame is, what those stories are, what those, in many cases, those lies that we are telling ourselves, until we can create those safe spaces to where it's okay to have the conversation, shame will continue to be destructive. Shame will continue to be deadly. Shame will continue to live silently and again continue to kill openly. That, I submit to you, is a fact. All right. So thank you for joining me tonight. I know it was late. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you for your comments. I can see everybody's name. I know Nicole, Dale, Shelby. I know some other folks were on, but I appreciate you. And I pray that you will, again, contribute more to the conversation around shame, more to the conversation around connection, more to those who are in your circles of your influence. I hope so. I know so. Love you, Shelby. Love you, all of you. Thank you. And we'll be back next week. All right. Be good, be blessed, be safe. Take care.